Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. When I was dead broke, man, I couldn't picture this. 50-inch screen, money green leather sofa. Got 2 rides, a limousine with the chauffeur.
Hello and welcome to Review My Games' first ever video review. I'm Parsons and I'm going to be reviewing Resident Evil for the PlayStation 1, which I've got here. So here's the review. Resident Evil, or Biohazard as it's known in Japan, is a survival horror game that was developed and published by Capcom. It was released for the PlayStation console on March 22nd, 1996 in Japan, March 30th, 1996 in North America, and August 1st, 1996 in the PAL region. It was later released for Microsoft Windows and for the Sega Saturn, and remakes were also made for other consoles. It was first released in Japan under the name Biohazard, but when it was released in America they decided it would be impossible to trademark the name Biohazard, as many other things, including another game and a band, were already using the name Biohazard. They decided it needed a different name, so they came up with Resident Evil as the game is set in a mansion. The story is basically, a series of bizarre murders have taken place on the outskirts of Raccoon City, with signs of cannibalism on the victims' bodies. The Raccoon Police Department's Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS for short, are assigned to investigate the murders. STARS is divided into 2 teams, there's Alpha Team and Bravo Team. Bravo Team go to investigate the murders, but contact with them is lost, so Alpha Team are sent to investigate their disappearance. The game is set on July 24th, 1998, when Alpha Team find Bravo Team's helicopter, but there are no signs of survivors. While searching for clues, all that they manage to find is a severed hand. They are then attacked by dogs, which kill the STARS member Joseph Frost. The pilot, Brad Vickers, then abandons the team to save himself. The team are forced to run from the dogs into a nearby mansion. Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton and Albert Wesker are all now trapped inside this mansion. Players can either play as Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine. If they choose to play as Chris, then Barry Burton goes missing at the start of the game, but if they choose to play as Jill, then Chris Redfield goes missing. As Chris Redfield would mean that players would get more firepower and can take more damage, but playing as Jill Valentine would mean that they can hold more items and can use lockpick to access areas which Chris could not access that early on in the game. However, both characters control exactly the same. The directional buttons are used to walk forward, back, and to turn around. Use R1 to draw your weapon and press X to fire. However, when shooting enemies there is no first person, bullets fire in the direction that you're facing. At first this doesn't matter, because the zombies move slower than a pensioner who's just lost their Zimmer frame, and you can normally just walk around them rather than actually killing them. However, as the game progresses, enemies get more difficult, and the game's terrible controls make it even worse. This isn't necessarily a bad thing though, as the game's bad controls make you more certain that you're going to die, making the game scarier, which is good as it is a survival horror game. The lack of ammunition makes the game more frustrating, but again that also fits the atmosphere of the game, making you have to ration your ammunition to make sure that you have enough for the harder enemies. You play as 3D characters on a preset 2D background, making the game need to use fixed camera angles. Once again it's good for the atmosphere, as it makes the game feel more cinematic. Also it helps with the horror, as you can't see whether or not a zombie is near you, making you more nervous about moving forward to the next bit. However, the graphics are awful, but then again, what do you expect from a game on the PlayStation 1? They do look terrible though, and they make the game look a little more goofy, which doesn't help improve the horror. One of the best things about this game is the voice acting, purely because it's one of the worst things about this game. The acting is worse than some B-list movies. I still laugh at Barry calling Jill the master of unlocking, and who can forget the iconic Jill sandwich moment? I don't think it was meant to be funny though, it's actually meant to be a very serious game, but it's hard to take it seriously with acting as terrible as that. Yet it's still one of the reasons I like the game so much. I find it entertaining, but realistically it does remove from the effect that they were trying to give. Overall, this works as a horror game. The fixed camera angles make it feel more cinematic, along with difficult controls and small amounts of ammunition, this all provides a scary atmosphere. However, this is somewhat tarnished by the voice acting and bad graphics. Resident Evil is a game that is playable, but is by no means the best in the series. On the plus side though, it's also not the worst in the series. That title probably goes to the Outbreak games, which were terrible. Resident Evil worked as a horror game, but was merely the foundation for something much bigger, introducing the story which many would come to love. Nowadays, most people buy Resident Evil just to complete the set so that they have the whole story, but if it was the only Resident Evil game ever to be released, then the Resident Evil franchise would not have done anywhere near as good as it has done. It is fun to play, but alone it's just an average game. But its sequels have used its story to develop into better games, and, in return, Resident Evil has used its sequels to give itself more popularity in the gaming community.
For these reasons, I'm going to give Resident Evil 2 stars. You may think that's a pretty low score, but on this site, 2 stars means it's an average game, which isn't bad. Its sequels are worthy of more, but alone, it was just an average game. It may have introduced the Resident Evil series, and partly introduced the survival horror genre, but it didn't dominate them. That's my opinion of Resident Evil.